Schools are supposed to be places of learning, safety, and routine. But once the lights go out and the hallways are left empty, they can feel more like prisons of memory. Abandoned classrooms, echoing gymnasiums, and basements no one dares step into have all been the settings for some of the most disturbing encounters people claim to have experienced. Tonight, I'll be sharing 3 true scary stories that all took place in abandoned schools. So turn down the lights and let's begin.
The swings moved, though no wind touched them, and in the silence of the night, someone realized the children on the playground weren't making a single sound. It was a little after 3 in the morning when Eric decided to take the long way home. He lived in a small town where nothing much ever happened, and the streets at that hour were usually dead quiet. He cut past the old elementary school's squat, brick building that had been boarded up for years, left to decay after budget cuts forced its closure. The place had always been unsettling after dark, its playground equipment rusting in the moonlight, the glass windows broken out long ago. As he walked past the chain link fence, he noticed something odd. A rhythmic creaking sound carried through the air. At first he thought it was just the wind dragging a loose sign or rattling the fence. But then he realized it was too steady, too deliberate. It was the sound of a swing moving back and forth. Eric slowed down, listening. The street was otherwise silent. No cars, no insects, not even the usual hum of distant traffic. Just that creak, 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 like the metal chains of the swing set straining under weight. He stopped and turned his head. That's when he saw them. At first he thought it was a trick of the dark, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw dozens of small figures scattered across the playground. The swings moved, the merry-go-round spun, and the seesaw bobbed gently, as though a recess was in full swing. Only, the children weren't right. They looked like silhouettes, darker than the night itself, their outlines blurred at the edges. He couldn't see faces or clothing, just the unmistakable forms of children. They ran, they climbed, they played, but there wasn't a single sound. No laughter, no footsteps on gravel, no squeals or chatter, only the groaning of the swing chains and the faint squeak of rusted metal. Eric froze. His first instinct was that maybe they were just kids sneaking out, though the thought didn't sit right. Why would dozens of children gather at an abandoned playground at 3 in the morning? And why did they all move in silence? The hair on his arms stood up. Something deep in him screamed that he shouldn't be watching, that he needed to keep walking, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. One of the figures suddenly stopped mid-swing. The swing seat stilled instantly, no gradual slowing. Its head, or what Eric assumed was its head, turned in his direction, and then another child turned and another. In a matter of seconds, every single figure on the playground had stopped moving, their shadowy heads all fixed on him. Eric's stomach dropped. His legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to respond. He forced himself to move, taking a step back toward the sidewalk. The creaking had stopped now, and the silence was so complete it rang in his ears. Then, all at once, the figures began to move again, but not like before. They didn't play, they didn't run. They started walking, slowly and in unison, toward the fence where Eric stood. Panic surged through him. He turned and started down the street, quickening his pace without daring to look back. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the empty pavement. He tried to convince himself it wasn't real, that maybe he was just tired and imagining things. But then he heard the sound of gravel crunching in sync with his steps. Dozens of pairs of feet just behind the chain link. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The figures were lined up along the fence, their hands gripping the rusted wire. Their faces, or what should have been faces, pressed up close. In the moonlight, their forms shimmered faintly, as if smoke barely holding its shape. Eric broke into a run. His heart hammered against his ribs, and every instinct screamed to get away. The farther he got, the quieter it became, until finally the sound of gravel faded behind him. He didn't stop until he was blocks away, lungs burning, drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. When he finally turned around, the street behind him was empty. No figures, no sound, just the dead silence of a sleeping town. He made it home and locked every door and window, though he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it did, he dreamt of creaking swings and silent laughter. The next morning, curiosity gnawed at him. Maybe he'd hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe stress and exhaustion had played tricks on him. Against his better judgment, he went back to the school in daylight. The playground was still there, rusted and overgrown. But what unsettled him most wasn't what he set, was what he didn't. The gravel beneath the swings was smoothed flat, as though something had been dragging across it over and over. The merry-go-round, which had been frozen in place for years, now bore fresh streaks of wear where the metal had turned. And on the swing closest to the fence, the chains were still swaying ever so slightly, as if someone had just been there. Eric never took that route home again, and to this day, whenever he hears the sound of a creaking swing in the distance, his chest tightens, because he knows that silence always follows on the silence means they've seen you. So if you ever pass an abandoned schoolyard late at night and you hear the sound of swings moving with no wind, don't look too long, because if they notice you, they'll never forget your face.
The book was old, waterlogged, and forgotten, but when he opened it, the only face left untouched was his own smiling back at him from decades before he was born. Marcus had always been drawn to abandoned places, the crumbling houses, shuttered factories, and forgotten schools scattered across the small town felt like echoes of another life, places where the air itself carried memories. He wasn't an urban explorer in the flashy, camera-wielding sense. He just liked to walk, to wander, to feel the strange quiet of places that no one else dared to enter. That's what brought him to the abandoned middle school on the edge of town. It had been closed for nearly 20 years, left to rot after a fire damaged the upper floors. He had passed by it countless times, but never gone inside, until one late evening when curiosity outweighed caution. The hall smelled of mold and wet concrete. Wallpaper peeled in long strips from the walls, and broken glass crunched under his shoes. His flashlight beam jittered across faded lockers. Their paint bubbled from rust, and classroom doors that were either hanging crooked or locked tight. Everything was silent except for the occasional drip of water from pipes overhead. He should have turned back when he realized the basement was flooded. The staircase leading down was slick with moisture, and the stench of mildew grew stronger with every step. But he was stubborn. He wanted to see how deep the water went, to glimpse the forgotten parts of the school that no one had touched in years. At the bottom, ankle-deep water spread across the floor. Old desks floated in the murky puddles, their legs jutting up at odd angles like broken bones. The air was heavy, humid, and colder than the rest of the building. He swept his light across the room, and that's when he saw it. On a desk, perfectly dry despite the standing water, sat a yearbook. It looked impossibly intact, its cover cracked but not ruined, its edges yellowed but untouched by mold. He hesitated, but his curiosity won. He picked it up and opened to the first page. Every photograph had been scratched out. Teachers, students, even group shots. Each face had been violently gouged with deep, deliberate lines. His chest tightened as he flipped through page after page. Whoever had done this had made sure no one's face remained visible. No one's, except one. Near the back, his flashlight caught a photo that hadn't been touched. It was a clear portrait of a boy, smiling wide, because his stomach dropped. The boy in the picture wasn't just familiar. It was him, his own face, staring back from the page. Marcus stumbled back, nearly dropping the book into the water. His thoughts raced, trying to piece together what he was seeing. The school had been shut down before he was even born. There was no reason his face should be in a yearbook from decades ago. And yet, there it was, his own smile, frozen in black and white. The room felt colder. His flashlight flickered once, briefly plunging him into darkness. When the beam steadied, he realized the water around his legs had begun to ripple, though he wasn't moving. It lapped against his shins in rhythmic waves, as if something beneath the surface was disturbing it. Marcus's breathing grew shallow. He set the book back on the desk, but the water didn't stop moving. He turned to leave, his shoes splashing as he pushed toward the stairs. But the further he moved, the more distorted the ripples became, spreading outward in circles that broke against floating desks. Halfway to the stairs, he froze. From behind him came the sound of pages turning. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus whipped around. The yearbook was still on the desk, still open, but its pages were flipping, as though a hand were skimming through them. He felt his throat tighten. There was no breeze. The air was still. The pages stopped. The book lay open again, face up. Even from where he stood, Marcus could see that the untouched photograph had changed. The face, staring back, wasn't smiling anymore. It looked older, harder, like a version of him he didn't recognize it. Still unmistakably his own. Marcus bolted. He splashed through the water, every step echoing in a silent basement. He didn't look back, not even when he felt a shift in the air, as though something had risen from the water behind him. His flashlight shook wildly as he sprinted up the stairs, 2 at a time, heart hammering. When he reached the hallway above, he didn't stop to catch his breath. He ran straight out of the building into the cool night air, gasping as he put distance between himself and that basement. For weeks, Marcus tried to rationalize what he'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a coincidence, a case of exhaustion making him see himself in someone else's face. But no matter how he explained it away, one thing haunted him. He never went back for the yearbook. But sometimes late at night, when the house was still, he swore he could hear the sound of wet pages turning in the dark. And once, just once, he woke to find a yearbook on his desk, open to the same page, his face staring back, a little older than the night before.
Imagine walking through a school that's been empty for decades and hearing a teacher still calling roll. Now imagine the last name they call is yours. This story was sent in by a man named Alex, who swears it's the strangest and most terrifying experience he's ever had. He grew up in a small town where the old high school had been shut down for years. The building was left to rot, windows broken, paint peeling, the whole place falling apart. Most people avoided it, but Alex had a habit of exploring abandoned places. One night, he decided to bring a flashlight and check out the school gymnasium. He had always heard rumors that it was the most intact part of the building, the floor still scuffed with lines from basketball games long past. When he first stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and the silence was overwhelming. His light swept across the gym, collapsed bleachers, a faded scoreboard, and dozens of old wooden chairs stacked against the far wall. It felt eerie, but not dangerous, just forgotten. That was when Alex heard it. A faint, distant voice. At first, he thought it was just wind moving through the broken windows, but then he recognized the rhythm of it. A voice calling out names. It was soft, so soft he almost convinced himself it was in his head, but it grew clearer. A woman's voice, calm and steady, like a teacher taking attendance. Johnson. Smith. Parker. Alex froze in place. He knew there was no one else in the building. He strained to listen, his heart thudding in his chest. The names went on, each one clear as if spoken right into the room, though there was no one there. He slowly raised his flashlight, scanning the empty bleachers, the corners of the gym. Nothing, just that voice echoing off the walls. Taylor, Morris, Bennett. The air grew colder. Alex's breath misted in the beam of his flashlight, even though it was summer. He tried to convince himself it was a recording, some leftover system glitching to life after all these years. But there were no speakers, no working electricity. And then it happened. The voice called out one final name. Alex. His stomach dropped, his blood ran cold. Before he could even react, the silence shattered. The sound of dozens of wooden chairs scraping across the gym floor echoed from the far end of the room. Loud, chaotic, as if an entire class had just stood up in unison. Alex's flashlight flicked toward the noise, but the beam shook in his trembling hands. The stacked chairs along the wall trembled, some tipping, some sliding an inch across the ground as if invisible bodies were pushing them back. The sound was deafening, chairs dragging, feet he couldn't see stomping against the gym floor, all of it coming toward him. Alex bolted. He didn't even think. He sprinted across the cracked court, his shoes squeaking against the dusty floor as he charged for the exit. Behind him, the scraping chairs grew louder, like the invisible class was rushing to catch up. He burst out of the gym and into the hallway, nearly tripping over rubble as he scrambled for the main doors. He swears he didn't stop running until he was blocks away, gasping for breath under the glow of the streetlights. When he finally turned back, the school loomed in the distance, silent, still. But he swears, just as he caught his breath, he could still hear faint echoes of wooden chairs shifting inside. Alex never set foot in that school again. He doesn't know whose voice called the names or why the last one was his. But to this day, he can't stand the sound of chairs moving across a floor. So if you ever find yourself inside an abandoned school and you hear someone calling roll, don't wait to hear your name. Because if you do, you might not make it out before class begins.